going to continue on with the meeting. At this point, David, are there any issues updates?
Apologies, let me go back to the agenda. Well, you just got one 2 weeks ago now, and that's the issues update.
Okay.
We don't have any new issues.
Nothing new since then. Okay, great. Any comments on anything in general tonight from the commission?
I have one comment. It has to do just with the staff report, the memo that was submitted to us for the agenda that we just heard. The title block talks about the draft.
Oh,
study.
I know.
No,
I
that
apologize
was-
for the
that
cut
was
and
Get
paste
rid of
error.
that, so we don't have.
And I
that.
sent out a revised, I did
Yeah, we
email
got
you
a
all a
revised
Oh,
revised
okay,
version.
good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, any comments from anyone in the public?
Yes, Bill Jasper. Commissioner Krebs, I sent you a letter that I believe was passed around to all the commissioners requesting that you reopen the discussion on the 4th Street East and Brazil projects that were heard on March 9th. And in my letter, I gave the reasons for reopening that. I hope you've read it. If not, I could go through and make all the points. But if people have read it, I'll not read it.
I think, has everyone had a chance to read? Yeah, so, well, I'll have anyone, if they want to ask some questions for clarification,
Okay.
we can do that. But yeah, I don't think there's a need to have you read through
Okay.
yeah.
And I have a few other points I could bring out if need be, but I'll just leave it at that for now.
Okay, well, at this point, while you're still there, Bill, if anyone has any questions, we'll go ahead and.
I'm sorry.
Did anybody here have any questions based on the?
Well, I'm sorry, I wasn't here.
Oh.
If you could verify, exactly the events that occurred that night. It seemed to be some kind of 11th hour. Something happened at the end that kind of threw a wrench in this whole project about something an engineer could have explained to you guys as a commission. I'm sorry, you people.
I think there was at the point that we felt that it wasn't that, and we'd already closed the public comment period, and so we'd had our discussion, and I think we took the vote to move forward at that point, and that's why Mr. Jasper's come back to us, is that he feels that maybe he can provide the information
Right. Okay.
that we were after.
And-
Without going through the environmental review. So David, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to be clear, on both projects, the Planning Commission made similar decisions. The Planning Commission voted to direct staff to obtain studies on the project's potential to impact trees that are proposed to be preserved on the project site. Those potential impacts possibly resulting from compaction, grading, and changes to drainage. The concern being that those trees are necessary to screen views of these residences which are proposed on hillside properties. So also in directing the preparation of those studies, the Planning Commission further directed that be done through the use of an initial study, that is applying a level of environmental review to both projects. So, not to put words in the applicant's mouth, but I'm sure that the concern is that the preparation of an initial study inherently requires a somewhat longer process than might otherwise be the case. But at the same time, if that's the vehicle that the Planning Commission chooses, I feel like it is a vehicle that is legitimately available to the Planning Commission. And I did have one question myself, and that is, if hypothetically the Planning Commission were to agree to reconsider this issue and place the reconsideration of the issue and the applications, consideration of the applications themselves on a subsequent agenda, the earliest that that could happen would be April 27th.
27th, we're aware of that.
And I guess my question was, would you have the materials that the Planning Commission appears to be looking for in time for that agenda?
Yes, we plan to. In fact, we had them, and our soil engineer would have been able to present them at that meeting, we feel, had it not been shortchanged. So we're prepared to come back with all that in a timely manner for the April 27th meeting.
Through the chair.
Sure.
One of the difficulties when you're facing a question of needing and or wanting additional information, and specifically when that information respects the question of potential environmental impacts, is normally if the city prepares an environmental document, the city is I don't want to use the word control, but I'm going to use it sort of to that extent, controls the, and please don't take this the wrong way, but the veracity of that information. In other words, you've either done the report, the study, or you've had a study by the applicant peer reviewed. I think trying to do it on the fly at that night, and I wasn't there, may have been part of what the concern was. You don't have the opportunity to have staff take any good look at that information. You don't have the opportunity to have, say, an arborist peer review it. What are the potential impacts on the trees, et cetera. So I think to the extent that there's additional study information that the commission wants, you have two choices. You can decide to reconsider, I'm using that term fairly loosely here, reconsider how you want to receive that information, or you can keep going forward the information under those circumstances. I'm assuming, David, you would present as part of an initial study.
Yes, a report that was basically commissioned and managed by staff.
Correct. So those were the issues you faced that night. If the commission wants to, I need to be clear about how you could go about this, because you're a little trapped at this point by the interplay between what you would have to do to reconsider and the fact that you don't have reconsideration on the agenda tonight, which means you can't do anything with it tonight. So the most that the commission could do this evening would be, and I think David previously shared this with commission members, but the most the commission could do this evening would be vote to agendize it for a future meeting. At that point, we could agendize sort of the three parts necessary for you to reconsider, which would be, number one, a vote, which would require a supermajority, a 4/5 vote, to suspend the rule that your reconsideration has to take place at the meeting immediately succeeding the meeting at which your original action was taken, because that's the rule. You can reconsider an item either at the meeting where you took the action or the very next meeting, but further down the line requires a different action that a 4/5 majority must approve to consider it later. That's contained within Rosenberg's Rules of Order, which have been adopted by the city as the rules of order are applicable to the Planning Commission and the City Council. Assuming for the sake of argument at that subsequent meeting you did that, then someone who voted on the prevailing side of the matter that you took on, what date was that, the 7th? Yes. Am I right? Okay. Someone who voted on the prevailing side on the 7th would need to make a motion for reconsideration.
Actually, it was the 9th.
I'm sorry, so it was the 9th, thank you. On the 9th, would need to make a motion for reconsideration, and that motion would need to pass by a simple majority for reconsideration to take place. And then third, if you requested it be agendized on that night provisionally, in other words, assuming that those two motions that I just discussed passed, you could agendize for the same night the actual reconsideration and take up the question of what form do you want this additional information to take. Now, having said all of that, you're pretty far down the road at that point, so it's up to the commission whether you want to do that. If David is pointing out that all of that couldn't take place, in other words, that reconsideration wouldn't be able to take place until April 27th. And then after that is when you would have to then receive the information, have either the initial study or the staff reports prepared. In other words, you're delaying until April 27th the question of getting to work on that information, on getting that information back to you. I'm not speaking one way or another, whether that is a pro or a con. I'm just saying, as you move this, the further you kick this down the road, the further away everything continues to get. But with that, if there's any questions, certainly happy to answer them.
So I guess, so what you're fundamentally saying is we actually couldn't then rehear the item until it would be our May meeting then?
No.
It would depend on when the information got to you. Okay, you could determine that you wanted to put it all together on that April 27th meeting. But if on April 27th your motion to reconsider doesn't pass, or if on April 27th you decide, well, wait, we really do want it to take the form of an initial study, you're kicking that can further down the road than if you start it now. That was my only observation. And it was merely that, an observation.
And
Yeah. Hang on just a second. Yeah.
And we're happy with that. We just want to be able to present into the record the reports from our soil engineer, our surveyors. We've already engaged an arborist. We feel that everything we've done would normally, and in a project like this, be part of the condition of approval, that you do it and you show that it's been done, as opposed to requiring a complete separate study which has to start the wheels rolling. And this commission and the city has plenty of other things to do besides a special study to address a tree issue, we feel. And the other reason that time is of the essence is because we have a deadline of tomorrow if we want to appeal that decision to the city council. Because frankly, I started this project 2 years ago, and I won't go into the long story, but we've run into roadblock after roadblock, primarily, in my opinion, put up by our former city engineer. We've looked at suing the city on 2 different occasions and backed off and said, we don't want to do that, let's let it take its road. And finally, in January, things came together. We got the revised easement with the city, and then last month we got approval on the lot line adjustment. So everything came together. We were ready, having done all of our homework, to go ahead and hopefully get approval and start construction. We think that the way it's going now, it's going to, if it goes back to a separate study, frankly, we're going to lose another year.
Question,
Through the chair.
yeah, yes.
I wanted to bring my perspective when I was debating this and my rationale for requiring some additional work and blending the things that the applicant has done with maybe some further analysis. With respect to the fact that our commission is reviewing a use permit for the development of two projects, but also the construction of a road. And as a commissioner, I didn't feel comfortable approving a use permit without understanding what sort of deed restrictions we would necessarily apply to tree preservation, drainage, and those sorts of things that would be able to perpetuate the maintenance of trees and also the maintenance of a road, and within the context of the hillside and that sensitive area. And so that's where I was coming from, and I think it doesn't matter how it's delivered, it's the ability for us as the commission to be able to set conditions of approval as they relate to a use permit, which is an ongoing perpetuity with the land.
Understood. I want to make clear that what you're looking at right now is a question, and so I want to kind of cut you off a little bit because I don't want to have you go off into actually rehashing the previous hearing now tonight because it's not on the agenda tonight. So the question before you really is, do you want to re-agendize this item so that you would have the opportunity to reconsider it, which doesn't guarantee you're going to vote to reconsider it, or are you prepared to not re-agendize the item and stick with what happened at your previous meeting and you're not bringing this back before you? And that's really the only question you're being asked right now.
And the applicant is basically gambling in a sense that he can provide you with the information that you're looking for. If he can't, then you can stick with your previous
And
proposal.
if not, then we're no worse off.
Okay, well, I think that's, I think, unless anyone has any other question, we have enough room or enough information for a discussion.
I do have through the chair.
Yes?
Can you explain why the soil engineer somehow didn't have a chance to explain to the commission? Just a certain happenstance, it's just,
It was a result of the fact that the public hearing had been closed.
Okay. Commissioner Sack, I'll start with you again.
I'd be willing to re-agendize the matter on the 27th, as long as we can include that study in the conditions of approval.
It can't be conditional. I mean, you'll make that decision at the time.
Yeah, so the only thing you're being asked tonight, and the only thing you can do tonight, is to make a determination whether you want to put it back on the agenda. Beyond that, that's for that, when it comes back on the agenda for you to talk about.
But excuse me, but we can't request that we have the information in advance in anticipation that it might pass?
Oh, I think you can,
You will get it.
you can say, we want all of this information to be pre-submitted. Sure, you can
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah, I
worried
just
about
want to
that.
make
but-
sure that we can
Yeah.
go all, we can, if, as long as each successive item passes, we can continue through approval that night. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Is that correct?
As long, well, again, that would be your decision about what you direct to be agendized. If you direct only the question of reconsideration to be agendized, then you're just going to get the first two motions and you're not, two options, and you're not going to get the third actually reconsider the project. If you say, we want all three of those things to be re-agendized, then staff will re-agendize all of them for one meeting, and you could go all the way to the end, assuming the first two motions pass. You could
Okay, yeah,
then
and
get
that's
to
what-
the merits.
That's what, yes.
Yeah.
We can do that if, yeah.
So long as you direct it to be agendized in that fashion, yes.
All right, so just for clarification, do you mean all three or just the
Yes,
first
I
one?
meant all three.
Commissioner Coleman?
I make a motion for all three to be agendized that night.
Well, we'll have a little further discussion
Right.
before the, Commissioner McDonald?
My objective is just to make sure that we can condition the project appropriately as a use permit. And I don't want our council have to deal with this. I would much rather have it handled with our commission. So if the applicant feels that they could submit the information that we had requested at the previous hearing and give time for staff to analyze that and through an initial study, it was a very focused one as it related to trees, grading, drainage, and coordinating all of those analysis. I don't have a problem with,
Re-agendizing it.
yes. I don't.
So I guess with that, I might make a different suggestion to the commission or an extended suggestion to the commission. Notwithstanding the fact that staff has said the 27th, am I right on the 27th?
Yes.
Would be the earliest date that it could get on the agenda. That presupposes that everything lines up and all of the information so that they can respond to the things that you want to have responded to for the on the merits discussion could happen by that date. I would suggest to the commission that you don't actually pick a date, but it will come back to you when, I guess, staff feels you can be responded to.
If you wanted to move it back to the first meeting of May, we're comfortable with that, bearing in mind on April 13th, Darius's Hotel is coming to you. And it's not assurance that you're going to get through it that night. That may carry over to the 27th. So if you want to
Yeah.
give yourself a little
Yeah.
flexibility, more time to review it, put us on the first meeting in May.
Fantastic.
Okay, does that work? All right, is that good with you,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald? Okay.
Does somebody,
Commissioner Wilhart, do
Had
you
a
have any
motion.
comments on this?
Commissioner Coleman made a motion, correct?
Yeah, I said we're having further discussion, yeah.
Just
make sure everyone
a
gets it.
clarification. So Mr. Jasper is going to submit all of the technical material. It's going to be evaluated by planning, and there's going to be a tentative evaluation and decision that's appropriate to that that April 27th meeting, is that what I understand?
Yeah.
Well,
The May meeting.
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, if
well,
it's
at
not-
whatever meeting, but basically, we would be expecting to receive some supplemental information from Mr. Jasper addressing the concerns that had been raised by the commission. It is going to be up to the planning commission to decide whether or not that information adequately addresses
Sure.
your concerns. But that's the basis on which we're proceeding.
Right.
And through the chair,
Yeah.
the analysis will be done through an initial study or some way of vetting all that information together, as opposed to having separate reports and not analyzing it. I mean, right now, we were looking at was several reports, but nobody putting those reports together and giving us.
Well, I think that we would try to work with the applicants to try to give you a coordinated picture of, the totality of what's going on.
Okay,
We do our best to do that.
awesome, thank you.
Sorry, I always forget the microphone. If when you get there you feel it's not sufficient, you can go right back to the position you were in before.
You
So,
kick
yeah.
the can.
Yeah, okay. All right, so Commissioner McDonald made a motion. Is there a second? Second, so any further discussion?
I think Commissioner Coleman actually made the motion.
Didn't I say Coleman?
No, you said McDonald.
Oh.
To verify, I believe it was Commissioner
Yeah,
Coleman.
Commissioner
I did.
Coleman,
I
I'm
made the
sorry.
motion.
I was
And
looking
who's
at
second?
him when
Who
I
was the
said
second?
that, but
I read my notes and it had motion,
Yeah.
so I said motion.
And the second was Commissioner Bohar.
yeah, the
Correct.
second was
Okay.
Commissioner Bohar, so now further discussion? Seeing none, then we'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, and so that's for all three items to be reagendized in sequence.
On the May,
On the May meeting.
first May meeting.
And so that motion was unanimous.
Unanimous.
Great, thank you very much.
And
Okay, do I hear a motion to adjourn at this point?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay. Second?
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That one is unanimous as well, 5-0. We're going home. Or to the Starling.